I founded an organization called Converge Consulting, and we are a social justice consulting firm. And our mission is to accelerate the creation of a radically just new world. And much of my personal story as a founder really, again, illuminates sort of why I do this work of justice. And one of those pieces of that story is the birth of my youngest son, August. August Kamau Madiba Bradbury, who is now going to be 10 on November 8th, was born 10 years ago and was born as a micro-preemie. And so I went into labor at 19 weeks with August, and I held him in. I kept him cooking for another 5 weeks and delivered him at 24 weeks as a 1 pound, 11-ounce preemie. And what is so significant, because I know a lot of women listening, a lot of families have had that type of traumatic event. But it was really eye-opening for me as a well-educated, upper middle class African-American woman, and someone who has done a lot of work around social justice and has seen the statistics around birth outcomes for Black women in this country and the disparity. And going through that experience, here I am finding myself a statistic.
Welcome to Linda's Corner, where we bring more hope, healing, and happiness to the world. My name is Linda Bjork, and today we're going to be talking about social justice and radical self-care. I'm delighted to welcome Takema Robinson. Takema is the CEO and founder of Converge, a national social justice consulting firm. You can reach Takema at her website, convergeforchange.com, and I'll include a link in the show notes. Welcome, Takema. I'm so glad that you could join with me today.
Thanks for having me, Linda.
This is going to be fantastic, and I'm excited to hear all of your story and all of the amazing things that you're doing. But I would love first to have a chance to get to know you a little bit more. Would you be willing to start by sharing your story of your wonderful son, August? And then I would love to hear about some of your legacy, what has been passed on to you and what you are hoping to leave behind.
Oh, wow. Those are such great questions. So again, thank you for having me today. And thank you for those questions. Those actually get to the heart of who I am as a person and as a mother, and really kind of, I think, illuminate why I do the work that I do. So for those folks out there in podcast land, I founded an organization called Converge Consulting, and we are a social justice consulting firm. And our mission is to accelerate the creation of a radically just new world. And much of my personal story as a founder really, again, illuminates sort of why I do this work of justice. And one of those pieces of that story is the birth of my youngest son, August. August Kamau Madiba Bradbury, who is now going to be 10 on November 8th, was born 10 years ago and was born as a micro-preemie. And so I went into labor at 19 weeks with August, and I held him in. I kept him cooking for another 5 weeks and delivered him at 24 weeks as a 1 pound, 11-ounce preemie. And what is so significant, because I know a lot of women listening, a lot of families have had that type of traumatic event. But it was really eye-opening for me as a well-educated, upper middle class African-American woman, and someone who has done a lot of work around social justice and has seen the statistics around birth outcomes for Black women in this country and the disparity. And going through that experience, here I am finding myself a statistic, and finding myself living through that experience and my family living through that experience and bringing August to the other side. And it was just really an eye-opening life experience where the work becomes my personal reality. Thankfully, 10 years fast forward, he is a happy and healthy boy. We've lived through the first few years where he was back and forth to the hospital constantly, where we went through 6 months of enduring the NICU to coming home on oxygen tanks and still having to deal with the after effects of prematurity, specifically around his lung issues. But so many things, I experienced in that situation. And when the work becomes your personal reality, it's definitely changed who I am. It's definitely changed my perspective on the work and really personalized it for me, not only as a Black woman, but a woman and a mother and someone who continues to fight to make sure that women in this country have access to the full gamut of reproductive justice, opportunities as they need to care for themselves and their family through the journey of motherhood.
And I'm so glad your story has a happy ending. That is a miracle right there. Just a little personal connection. One of my former roommates from college had a preemie baby born at 25 weeks, but she was not fortunate. She lost her little one. And so I am so grateful that your son lives and is healthy. What a marvelous thing. And how amazing that is to you can hear stories, you can read statistics, but when it's your experience, it's everything. It is your world. It changes everything. And I loved how you said, this applies to me. I'm not a statistic. I'm a person. This is my experience. And then to be able to expand that and say, wow, I want this positive outcome to be more people's experience. So that is beautiful. What an amazing reason. Oh, I'm so happy. Now you have a beautiful legacy from where you came from, and you are creating a beautiful legacy to pass on. You've talked a little bit about the legacy you're passing on. We're going to talk more about that, but let's hear also about where you came from.
Yeah, I do have a beautiful legacy and one I'm extremely proud of. And again, to your point, I'm proud, and I talk a lot about, what we inherit from not only our parents and our grandparents, but also our ancestors, those folks who dreamt of us, those people who I always say, we are the dreams of our ancestors. There were people who endured many a tribulation in order for us to be here many generations later. And I believe I have a duty to do that for those folks whose names I don't even know, who are coming down in my lineage. Our Native American brothers and sisters always remind us of the 7 generations before and the 7 generations after. And so my legacy, again, is one I'm extremely proud of. I come from a direct line of social justice warriors. Both of my parents were young activists, which is sort of how they meant in the trenches of activism in the 70s in New Haven, Connecticut, where I'm from, but also my grandmother, who was both an elected official as well as a community organizer, and did tons and tons of work to really on the forefront of desegregation in the 60s and 70s. And so, I inherit her legacy. I've talked before about like finding her papers many years later, her invitations to the White House, her correspondence with governors and senators, and her mentorship of many folks who have gone on to, continue to do this work of social justice. And so I'm extremely proud of that. And even further back than that, I have found in some of the research and, through some of the stories of the elders in my family, the land that we actually hold on to and call home, our homestead, was actually an Underground Railroad site. And so I think a lot about this legacy and how it comes to produce me, and you and I get to have this conversation. It informs who I am, and really the responsibility that I also hold of continuing to pass that down through the generations that followed me.
And isn't that beautiful? And every time we see an example of someone who made a difference, it gives us confidence and permission that we can make a difference too. And you have this
Absolutely.
beautiful legacy that's Takema can make a difference. And she is. So let's talk a little bit about that, because I had a chance, I checked out some of your website and some of the wonderful things that you're doing to help create and promote equality. And a lot of people who have this same goal are not having the positive results that they want to achieve. And that matters. How our procedures and how our presentation is going to affect the outcome. And so one of the things I noticed, you have some online training available to help with businesses and organizations so that they can overcome racial injustice and intersectionality. And there are organizations who are trying to do these things. And yet, by the way that they're approaching it, they're actually increasing rather than decreasing. And so I would love to hear what kinds of things that you have found that people are doing wrong, even well-meaning people, and what we can do to correct that.
Yeah, I love the question. And we're actually living in such a polarized time that I think we have to call that out and recognize that and understand that that stuff isn't just happening on CNN or Fox or MSNBC. It's actually happening in our everyday interactions. And most of our interactions take place at work, take place in the workspaces and the organization that we are bringing our labor and our ideas and our visions to. And so I think we see a huge opportunity at Converge for our support and our facilitation of some really difficult conversations. And those conversations, having those conversations in a safe space and in a place where people feel like they can talk to each other as human beings. And I think that's what we're not seeing enough of in our society at large. We're not seeing enough of the relationship building that allows us to have tough conversations. So many people are in an echo chamber of information, in an echo chamber, right? Where they're hearing what they want to hear. They're not hearing perspectives beyond that. And so what we try to do at Converge is really facilitate and create safe space so people can explore, what they might be thinking, because they may not have some of these ideas sorted out for themselves, but also explore the bigger possibility of what can we do together we can't do alone, because that's really why we have organizations and institutions, right? Because there's a recognition that I can't do this business by myself. You can't do your podcast by yourself. It takes a host of people to do anything for us to accomplish. But sometimes, because we don't have the safe space to really have a conversation, we end up going at each other as opposed to going with each other. And so first and foremost, what we do is try to create a safe space, which can be hard in organizations because there's usually a backstory of interactions. But how do we do that? How do we come in and actually get people to step beyond the self into the we and really sit with this question, what can we do together we can't do alone? And if we can be inspired by that, right? Be inspired by that possibility, we believe at Converge, people are willing to do the hard work, to roll their sleeves up. And most importantly, they're willing to lean in and listen in a different way. They're willing to lean in and build the relationship capital that is really needed to make change in our organizations. I personally believe if we're doing that work, organization by organization, company by company, entity by entity, that is going to have a major impact on our society.
I just want to stand up and cheer. What a beautiful thing to be able to create a safe space so that we can have a conversation rather than just echoing and repeating things that we have heard and things that we have interpreted, so that we can be able to open our minds and be able to actually have a conversation. So if I'm running an organization and I'm trying to increase equity and make things more racially fair and include everyone, what kinds of things can I do to help create a safe space?
Yeah, absolutely. And and I have a lot of compassion for people who are in the leadership space in this moment. So let me say that this comes with a lot of compassion. But I think to be a leader, it always begins with self and self-assessment. So I would say before you begin engaging, hold a mirror up to yourself. Right. And I know that's not the answer people want, because often that's the last thing we want to do, the last thing we want to avoid. But people really, to create a safe space, people want to hear authenticity and sincerity. They want to know where your heart is. They want to know where your head is. And oftentimes leaning in with that level of vulnerability, which could also include, I don't have all the answers to this. I don't know. Let's explore together. So being open and being vulnerable and being willing to hold a mirror up to yourself is a prerequisite for leaders. So I would say before you enter the space of leading the organization through, make sure you're holding the mirror up and really being honest with self, and being willing in the process to take critique, to take feedback. And so creating that safe space sometimes means stepping into it yourself, and demonstrating for folks, I'm willing to do this work. I'm willing to hold the mirror up. I'm willing to be uncomfortable. I'm willing to be courageous. And so that is where I would tell leaders to begin, is with their self and their own self-assessment on their willingness to be the safe space, right? To be the safe space.
Wow. Okay. And isn't it interesting that this leadership role, sometimes people think leadership means I am supposed to be perfect. And if I am perfect, that means I have no flaws and I can make no corrections because I require no corrections. And so here you're suggesting, no, leadership means I am willing to be authentic and take a look in that mirror. And that means that I might need to make a correction. Not that I'm telling you what to do, but that I'm looking at myself and saying, is there something here that perhaps in the way that I speak, in the way that I think, in the way that I interact, that needs a course correction? And to be able to even open up and say, you know what? I may have done that wrong. I own it. I apologize. Now that I know better, I'm going to do better.
I can do better. Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely, Linda. I would say that's the first step. And honestly, what we find is when leaders bypass that and they just start leading without that, it often backfires, particularly in this work around inclusion and around race and intersectionality. And so I think that part is really important. And of course, we're talking about topics that are related to our personal identity. I think leaders also have to own their personal identity. What does it mean to hold the space as a woman? What does it mean to hold that space as a leader, as a person of color, or a person who is not of color? What does it mean to hold that space as a person recognizing their privilege, or as a person who may not have had the same level of privilege? So again, I always believe this work begins with the leader and begins with that leader looking in the mirror.
Wow. Wow and ouch, because man, I cannot deflect that to anybody else. I have to take ownership for me. And I guess that makes perfect sense, because if I'm going to ask other people to take responsibility and accountability for themselves, then I need to do the same thing. And there are no exceptions. And I think that that matters, because sometimes leaders consider themselves to be the exception. It is,
Absolutely.
this is for you, because you are the, the plebeians down here. And up here, we get to do whatever we want. And now you're saying, no, accountability is for all levels. And I absolutely love that. What a beautiful thing. And as we're talking about hard topics and we're talking about identity, who am I? And how do I fit into the picture? And I love, there's a distinction that Brene Brown makes about the topics of fitting in versus belonging. And she
Mm-hmm.
talks about that fitting in order to fit in means I need to be the same. And
Mm-hmm.
belonging means that I am accepted the way that I am. And belonging doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. And when we're talking
Absolutely.
about identity and trying to fit in, there are some things that I could change, like behavior. Like we might have the group of people who, hangs outside and smokes outside the coffee room, whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
if I want to fit in, then I need to do the same thing you're doing. Or if I'm trying to be on the other end of the spectrum, a high achiever, I can try to be a high achiever so that I can fit in with that group. But belonging is different than fitting in. It means
Mm-hmm.
we can be different and we can accept each other with our differences. There are some things about myself that I cannot change. I cannot change my skin color. So I
Mm-hmm.
cannot fit in to certain groups, but I would love to belong.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And what a beautiful idea around belonging, right? And I think our mission statement speaks to this. Like, what if we all felt like we belonged here in this company, this country, or here in the companies or the organizations we are contributing our time and our talent to?
I love that. Do you have any other suggestions of what we can do? Because this is the mission statement. We want to belong. We want everyone to feel like they belong. So, what kinds of things can we do to help people feel like they belong? And as we talked about before, looking in the mirror, is there something I can do so that I feel like I belong?
Mm, interesting. So again, I think, we could talk going back to talking about the leader being safe space, being a safe space for staff and for them for their own journey, right? Accepting, it took me a long time to realize that who I am and some of my identity is part of why I'm an asset. So also really being able to stand in that and own that. And so I also hope that we encourage that out of people. Like, the value is in the diversity, the value is in the myriad of experiences and talents and backgrounds and, education and expertise that a team brings, right? And so real leaders are finding ways to hone that and finding ways to maximize that. And so this idea of belonging can be really operationalized. So what I would also say is, in this process of creating more equitable organizations, really make sure as a leader, you understand what the gifts and talents that your staff are bringing. They may have some things that they are bringing beyond their job descriptions. They may have some experiences that they are bringing that again speak to their uniqueness in the organization. And so I really think good leaders in these processes are really trying to get to know their staffs, their teams, and looking for those opportunities to create that belonging, to operationalize that belonging by tying in those very specific skills and talents that folks are bringing to the organization and finding ways to maximize those. So I would say definitely figure out ways to maximize the contributions from your team based on what they're bringing to the table is another really, really rich tidbit I can give to leaders around doing equity work. People want to be seen. And they want to be able to contribute, and sometimes those things, again, are beyond the narrowness of the job descriptions and really in their backgrounds and some of the other pieces that they're bringing. So that's another tidbit. I would also say, especially as we go into more hybrid work environments or more two-dimensional work environments where we're remote, finding ways to really help people build relationships and build connections. And it's very, very hard when we're not necessarily in the traditional work environments anymore for teams to adapt and to build relationships. But relationships are everything. They really can sync or they can really sink an organization. One of my favorite quotes is culture eats strategy for breakfast. Meaning that if our culture isn't good, it doesn't matter how great our business plan is. It doesn't matter how wonderful our strategies are. We have to really pay attention to the culture in our organizations, and underneath culture has to do with relationships. How are we helping our teams have relationships? And I worry about this again, like I said, in this post-pandemic, two-dimensional, sometimes hybrid work environments, is that we're taking for granted those interactions that people would have in between meetings and at the water cooler. And so again, how are we building time for folks just to have fun, for people to get to know each other outside of the work? And I believe that investment in those types of things really make this work easier because it's built on solid relationships between human beings. So don't forget about fun in this work as well.
I love that. And creating this culture of appreciating and recognizing individuality and being able to treat people as assets, I think is a benefit to everyone. I think it benefits the individual, and I think it benefits the organization. That is excellent advice. Now, do you want to cover anything about radical self-care at all?
Well, it's just one of my favorite topics, something I always find a way to bring up. But radical self-care for me has just been a life lesson. And it's been something that I've talked about in many spaces as a leader, and particularly as a woman leader and as a Black woman leader. And, for me, it's been a mantra and something a lesson that I continue to be taught in this work. And I would say, my conclusion is, our leadership acumen is often in proportion to our level of investment in ourselves and in radical self-care. I actually believe that for folks who have been historically oppressed, radically self-care is actually a political act to take care of self, to feed the self, to support the self. And I'm excited that it's growing more and more as a conversation topic in, our larger society, whether it be around mental health and wellness and about sort of, our individual mental health, but also it's coming into organizations, it's coming into conversations inside of companies around mental health, wellness, and the work-life balance. And so it's one of my favorite topics. It's something I'm continuing to learn more and more about. But I also believe that it is in direct proportion to our leadership acumen. Our ability to be good leaders really requires us to prioritize self. And it's just something I continue to learn as a founder, as a CEO, as a mother, and as a leader.
I love that. And as we take care of ourselves, then we're able to fulfill whatever other roles we're doing so
Absolutely.
much better because we are in a better place. That is fantastic. This has been a delight. Takema, is there anything else you want to make sure that we cover before we close today?
No, I'm just super excited to spend this time with you, Linda, and, really share with folks some of the things that we have learned at Converge, specifically around, leadership and doing the work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. If folks want to find out more about us, I know you'll share our website with us, especially organizational leaders. If these are things that you're struggling with, we have resources. We have a library of free resources. And if you're actually interested in in doing some equity audits or some equity work with your teams, consider us and go take a look at what we have on our website. There may be a few things, resources over there that can help you as you are considering, this path. Thank you, Linda.
Oh, thank you. This has been so delightful. I think that it's so important. And I just have really enjoyed all of the insight that you've brought today. So again, I thank you.
Thank you.
In closing, I'd like to share a quote by Martin Luther King Jr. He said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." Today, I invite our listeners to overcome darkness and hate with light and love, including love for ourselves. See you next time on Linda's Corner. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of Linda's Corner, please share and subscribe to help us reach new listeners. I also invite you to check out my nonprofit, Hope for Healing, at the website hopeforhealingfoundation.org for free ebooks and other free resources to help increase happiness, build confidence and self-esteem, strengthen relationships, manage stress, and calm feelings of depression and anxiety. I also invite you to grab a copy of one of my books, like Crushed, A Journey Through Depression, or Amazon bestseller, You Got This, an action plan to calm fear, anxiety, worry, and stress. See you next time on Linda's Corner.